Okay, thank you so much, Martha. Thank you everyone for joining us here this morning. I'd like to start with a piece of music. So this will be a piece of special music called Dance for the Arctic Moon. And when I composed this piece, I had the feeling of connecting with the sacred feminine dimension of consciousness. One of the things that I think is very important for us to be aware of is the feminine dimension of consciousness, which I think in many ways is suppressed in our society, but is resurrecting. I think in many ways, this is a good example. It's connecting with this capacity that we have to be receptive. And so the moon is a symbol very often of the feminine, also of spiritual illumination. And the direction of the north, of the four directions, is typically the direction of going within. So this is Dance for the Arctic Moon. I'd like to dedicate it to the healing of all of our relations. Encourage all of you as you're listening to perhaps let the music take you on an inner journey. And enjoy. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now, what do I say after that? It's great to be with you this morning. Thanks, all of you, for joining us here at the Center for Spiritual Living. And I'm really grateful to Reverend Bonnie, even though she's not here with us right now. We just send our love and appreciation to her as well. She was here yesterday for our workshop, and very inspiring being, for sure, to be here. So today I'd like to talk about awakening your inner genius. That's the title of the talk. And how many of you were here yesterday for the workshop? So I have a feeling. So quite a few of you were here. Great. So a lot of you weren't. The main idea I shared, one of the main ideas is that all of us have an internal guidance system. And this inner guidance system is something that we can all access when we quiet our mind. That's when I talked about earlier, the feminine dimension of consciousness, that what we are, all of us, is eternal consciousness that was never born and will never die. And we are functioning through a body that is perhaps male or female, but what we are is beyond these dualisms. And so when we learn to cultivate the feminine dimension of consciousness or receptivity, we can connect with an inner guidance system to help us live our unique life. And on every level, the work that we're doing, the food that we're eating, the relationships that we're having, the way we are in the world, I think is so important for us to understand that if we don't connect with our internal guidance system, right, our intuition, this inner knowing that the book that we heard earlier is really exercised to help us connect with that. If we don't connect with that, then what is our guidance system, and what actually is it? It's the cultural program. We have to, I think, really understand this clearly, that all of us from the time we're born are bombarded with all kinds of messages at a very powerful level. We're just little sponges growing up here. So their language becomes my language, their food becomes my food, their attitudes become my attitudes. And so we're accumulating on a very profound and deep level a whole way of seeing the world. And so in many ways, we're a product of our society. We live in a culture, but that culture lives in us. Our thoughts, our feelings, our aspirations, everything, our values and attitudes and so forth are a product of our society. And so if we're not in touch with our intuition, then basically we're a product of all of this conditioning from our parents, from our teachers. And a lot of it's not particularly positive or helpful. Very often the messages that we're getting through the media, from ministers, not Reverend Bonnie, but other ministers, all of this, what we're taking in, we've taken it in over the years, and so then we, in many ways, just are a product of that. And so there's really no spirituality or spiritual freedom in any of this process. We can go to church every Sunday and so forth, but if we're not in touch with our intuition, this inner guidance system, then basically we're a product of our society. And the only way our society can actually evolve and change is if we as individuals make an effort to connect with this inner guidance system, connect with our inner wisdom that's connected to a higher consciousness, which is our true nature. Then actually we become a force for evolution, for positive evolution, because we begin to help our society transform and to change. And when we come together like this and create communities that are based on the teachings that help us to do this, then I think we're doing something really important, really positive and helpful. So this has been going on for thousands of years. People have been programmed by their societies, and societies tend to stagnate unless people can awaken out of the ruts of the programming of the society. And so we have many different religious teachings. How many of you, for example, just have an idea, have studied the Buddhist teachings at all? Anybody? Some of you? Yeah, some of you have. How many of you have a regular meditation practice, Buddhist or whatever? Good. I think it's really important to have a spiritual practice that we do every day. It's like I couldn't play the piano if I didn't practice every day. Madeline wouldn't be able to be such a great artist if she didn't practice or do all the knitting and things she's doing. And many of you. So the whole idea is that a practical spirituality is something that we can practice, and it has to do with how we live our lives and how we're thinking and so forth. In the Buddhist tradition, which is what I'm mainly familiar with, I used to teach, comparative religion, and I really love going deep into the world religions and seeing how they share a lot of the fundamental teachings that are the same. I think if you distilled all of the world teachings of all the ancient wisdom traditions into one sentence, it would be basically to whatever it is that we most want for ourselves, to give that to others. This basic teaching of being kind and loving to others. And this really comes out of a capacity that we have as individuals to connect with our true nature. If our mind is busy and running around and thinking about what we want and what we don't want, and this is what we're trained in our society, essentially, to have a very busy mind, then it's very difficult for us to connect with this inner, still small voice that's present and actually help our culture to evolve. So in the Buddhist tradition, the underlying idea really has to do with working with our mind, and very similar, of course, to CSL, to work with our mind. And I remember, in fact, for example, when I was living in a Tibetan Buddhist center in San Francisco back in the 1970s, there was a Tibetan Lama that was living there with us, a teacher from Tibet, and there was, everybody has their foibles and so forth. There was this one woman who was kind of well known to be complaining all the time about everything. And so we were having dinner together at this restaurant in San Francisco, and she started again complaining about the meal and the food and everything. And so at one point, so he said to her something I still remember. He said, if you're looking into a mirror and you see that there's dirt on your face, on the face in the mirror, and you go and try to clean the dirt off the face that's in the mirror, and you try to get it off the mirror, but it's not going to work because the dirt is on your own face. You have to clean the dirt off your own face, and then the mirror won't have any dirt on it. And I think, this is an ancient wisdom teaching. If we want to make a better world, like Gandhi said, the only way to positive social change is positive personal change. If we want to create a more beautiful world, a more abundant world, a more loving world, we can go around trying to fix everybody else and trying to make them more loving and more kind, but we're not going to get very far, because if we're not living that ourselves, it's going to keep coming back. And if we are, it'll also come back. And so this ancient teaching in these ancient wisdom teachings, that our mind creates our reality, and that what we are essentially is infinite and eternal consciousness that was never born and will never die. And when we say that as a mental concept, of course, it's helpful, but it's much more helpful to deepen that through regular practice, through not only scriptural study so we understand it conceptually, but to actually quiet the mind and work with our breathing and listen internally and experience that what we are is watching. What we are is the witness that's watching what's happening. And we can watch our reactions, our emotional reactions. We can watch all of these things and realize that we are essentially not damageable by what happens in the world around us. And we can begin to see others in the same way. We can begin to see others also as expressions of eternal consciousness. And when we do this, this is bringing forth the healing power. Instead of seeing someone as wounded or hurt and so forth, we see the infinite being that was never harmed in any way. And when we see that, we help reinforce the truth. This is the truth of being. So these are movements. These are ancient wisdom teachings, and we can see how when people practice these things diligently, they can attain. In the Buddhist tradition, the idea is that we can attain enlightenment. We can actually escape from the prison of conditioned thinking. The prison that we're in, basically, is the false belief that what I am is a separate self. The idea that, I am my name, right? Will Tuttle, this is me right here, that I'm my body. One of the old teachings in the Buddhist tradition is that as a symbol, in fact, before there was ever an image of the Buddha, that was something that they didn't do that for 500 years. They had different other symbols. One of the main symbols was a footprint, because the footprint is a symbol of what we are. For example, if you go along a beach and you see some footprints, you know that footprint is not the being who made the footprint, right? If you go up to the footprint and say, well, good morning, George, how are you doing this morning? People are going to think, well, you're crazy. That's just a footprint. It's not the person who made that. But this is the thing to understand. Like right now, this is a footprint waving at you. This is not, you can't see the being, right? The being is non-visible. And so no, they never had a Buddha statue until like 500 years later. The Greeks had the idea. They made statues of everything. So we got to have a statue of this guy, you know. But they never would have done that, because the idea is it's not about the physical body. It's about the being that makes this possible. That's what we need to awaken to. So the idea, there's an old saying in Zen that he who answers when called is nothing but a thief. You understand what that means? No? Well, if someone says, hey, Will, I go, yeah. That's me, the separate self responding. But when you see, that's always stealing away from the actual awareness of what I truly am. And what we truly are is not just limited to this physical body and this object that's going to die. It's unavoidable. There's another old saying in Zen, which I think is a little bit of the humor of Zen, which is that being born is like stepping out onto a ship on a voyage that is definitely going to sink. And so the boat is going to sink, right? I mean, our physical body is going to pass away. And I think that is very important to keep in mind, because what that does is that creates beauty. That creates preciousness. That creates the idea this is a precious human life. I remember hearing the story recently of a woman. She's apparently the oldest living person. She's about 118 years old, and they interviewed her, and they said, wow, you're 118 years old. What is it like now to be the oldest person alive on earth, 118 years old? And she said, all I can say is, it sure went by awfully quickly. We're only here for a few decades. It goes by. I remember when I was studying Chinese, it was so funny. I was studying Chinese in Oakland at a community college, and the woman who was teaching Chinese, she was great. She really wanted us to understand Chinese culture. She said, if you go to China and you try to impress people that you know something, you come across as an authority or something like that, you have some understanding about things, and if you're not at least 60 years old, they'll laugh at you. They'll think, you're only 60 years old, you don't know anything. I remember I was sitting there and I was thinking, wow, 60, I mean, I'll never be 60. That was impossible. That was so far in the future. I knew it would never happen to me. So a few years ago, Madeline and I went to China, and it was so great to stand up in front of all the people, and I was giving a lecture on, we've been there many times actually, giving lectures on the World Peace Diet in China, but the first time I remember saying, and you have to listen to me because I am 60 years old. They thought, well, you don't look like you're 60. I said, well, I am, so you have to listen. But the idea is that our life goes by very quickly, so every day is a precious opportunity. Every day, we never know if this might be it. So every day is a precious opportunity to grow and to awaken. So it's really important to practice that awareness. Practice the awareness every morning. The first thought, wow, I have another day to grow, to learn, to contribute to creating a more harmonious world, to cooperate with others, to bring forth something more beautiful, to spread kindness and love and awareness. It's a precious opportunity. Think of it, we're on this planet in the middle of outer space. It's a beautiful, how many of you have noticed that this earth is beautiful? It's beautiful because it's transitory. Flowers are beautiful because they're transitory. Plastic flowers are okay, but they don't have the beauty that real flowers have. And it's the same thing with us. Our life is beautiful because it's only here just for a short time. Children, babies are beautiful. I was just with Madeline and I were just visiting my sister in Florida a couple of days ago. We just flew in, and my mother's 91 years old, and she's right on the edge of transitioning. And then my sister, and then her daughter came, and her daughter flew in from Massachusetts, and her just born little baby, who's only 2 months old, was there, and so 4 generations of vegan women. It was great, actually. But the whole idea was, for me, was just seeing this amazing transiency. My mother's ready to leave, and this one's just coming in, and this is our life. So how do we live our life, and what kind of statement are we making, actually, with every expression? Because we really do affect each other. We really are each other's teachers. And it's very important to think about this. I remember, there's another story I just want to briefly mention. In China, in the Buddhist tradition, there was a tradition. I know, I was a Zen monk over in Korea. They still had the same tradition, where when you're meditating, and you get to a certain level of enlightenment, then you go around to the different temples and monasteries, and you engage in what is called Dharma combat, which is if you think you're enlightened, you had a pretty deep meditation experience, then you go to a Zen master and they have a dialogue, and you try to show that how awake you are. And so it's very interesting to read these ancient dialogues. So they wrote them down. They're very interesting. And that would be how they would learn and test themselves against an enlightened teacher. And it's very important. Otherwise, the ego, I think I'm enlightened, and it's just an ego trip very often. So anyway, in this one particular case, it's an interesting story, I think, because there was a small temple that only had actually one monk and his brother. He had a younger brother who was only had vision in one eye, and also had some intellectual challenge. He wasn't very bright. He was just his older brother took care of this younger brother at this temple. And usually he was always there, but one day he had to leave, and he said to this younger brother, he said, "Listen, when you're away, when I'm away, I have to go on an errand. But when I'm away, just don't say anything. If someone comes to visit, just wait. I'll be back soon, And so he said, "Okay." So then the older brother left, and so then, lo and behold, while he was away, this monk came up to the monastery, and so then when the older brother was coming back from his errand, this monk who was visiting this monastery met him on the path to the monastery, and he said, "Do you live here at this monastery?" And the brother said, the older brother said, "Yeah, I live here." And he said, "Wow." He said, "You are so fortunate. Do you know that at this monastery there is a totally enlightened master, a Zen master of the highest caliber?" And the guy's thinking, "My brother? I don't think so." And he said, like, "What makes you say that?" And he said, "It was incredible." He said, "I went up to this monastery. I knew I had a feeling I was so close to enlightenment. And this totally enlightened man came out. He didn't say anything. He just maintained silence. I said hello. He didn't say anything." I thought, wow. Then I held up one finger, symbolizing the Buddha. Then he held up two fingers, symbolizing the Buddha and his teachings, the Dharma. So then I held up three fingers, the three jewels, the Buddha, his teachings, and the Sangha, the community. And then he held up a fist, showing me that all my concepts were empty. That the Buddha is not outside, it's in me. And I had a great enlightenment experience. I am so grateful, and I just want to thank you, and you are a very lucky man to live in such an enlightened aura of such an enlightened master. And he went running, he said, "I'm not worthy to stay in the presence of such enlightened people." And he went down and went on his way. And the brother came up to the monastery, and he saw his younger brother. And his younger brother was furious. He said, "Where did that guy go? I can't find him. Where did he go? He just disappeared. He went rushing off." And the brother said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Oh, this guy was nothing but insulting me. First of all, I didn't say anything, just like you said. And then he came up, and then he said hello. I didn't say anything. Then he held up one finger, symbolizing that I only have one eye." Oh man. I said, "All right." And he said, I was nice. I held up two fingers, symbolizing that, well, at least you have two eyes. Then he just insulted me again. He held up three fingers, showing that between the two of us, we only have three eyes. I was ready to hit him, and he ran off. Where'd he go? So it all shows, basically, that the world is a manifestation of our own potential, of our consciousness. If we're ready to be awakened, we can be awakened by anything. And there's many stories of this. There's a story in an old Zen tradition, like this young student went to a temple, and he was studying with this master, and this master kept feeling like he's holding something back. He's not giving me the whole teaching. And finally the old master said, "Okay, let's take a walk." And so they were walking along, and he said, "Do you hear the sound of the bird?" And he said, "Yeah, I hear it." And then he said, "Oh, look, do you see that beautiful flower?" "Yeah, I see it." And then he said, how can you say that I'm holding anything back? Nature is always teaching us if we can be open. And to make it a little more clear, then they kept going, and they came to the stream. And there was this, it was a pretty deep stream, more like a river. And the master, without stopping, just started walking into the stream and walked all the way across the stream and got into the middle of it. And so the student, being a good student, was just following right behind his master. And they got out into the middle of the stream, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, the master turned around and put his hand on the head of the student and just pushed him under the water. And the student, being a good student, said, okay, well, my master's holding my head underwater, but I can take it, no problem. So he was sitting there meditating with his head under the water, and the master kept holding his head underwater, and he kept meditating, and he kept holding, and he kept meditating, and he kept holding, and he kept meditating. But at a certain point, he had to take a breath. And so suddenly he just pushed himself to the surface with all his might, and the master's hand was, pushed away because he pushed himself so hard. And he blubbered it to the surface, and he was spluttering, and he looked at the master through his eyes that were all spluttery, and he said, what the heck are you doing, And the master just said to him, until you want enlightenment as much as you wanted that breath, you will not be successful. And that's how it is, actually. Really, our life is about priorities, and really about what's most important. And we can have pretty much whatever we want in many ways. We do get in many ways what we want, what we put our attention on. And so the thing to remember, and I'll begin to wrap it up here, is that all of us are born into a culture where we're surrounded by distractions. And this whole culture is designed to distract us, to turn us into consumers, to make us think that we need to have this and that and the other to be happy, to be fulfilled. And it's our intuition, this inner knowing, this inner wisdom that can help us remember our purpose, that we're here not just to consume, not just to buy things. The underlying idea in our society is, since we steal the purposes of billions of animals, whatever we sow, we reap. And we've basically live in a society where we've lost our purpose for the most part because we steal the purposes of others. So we've lost our purpose, and we think our purpose is to consume. Like the more we can consume and the more we can show everybody how much we have, then we're the most successful and the most powerful, successful people are the ones that consume the most and create the most destruction. So the whole idea is to realize that what we are essentially is already whole and complete, that there's a bubbling spring of joy in us all the time that is ready to burst forth when we attain our true nature. And that when we put our attention on practicing loving kindness and respect for others, and practicing inner listening, and living as best we can a life of kindness and helping others be free, then we're living our life, and we're focusing on what is most important. So the distractions will be there. We're unfortunately in a system that's really focused on, more than anything, on keeping us, in many ways, distracted by consuming. And it's so wonderful to have a community like this where we can come together and remind each other of the purpose of our lives, the deeper purpose, which is to awaken and then to create a community to help others to do the same thing. This is how these ancient teachings, like I'm talking about the ancient Buddhist teachings, the ancient Christian teachings, all the wisdom traditions of the world, they're only with us today because people made an effort, like they wanted another breath. They made the effort so strongly to question the official narrative in our society, not only that you read in the newspaper, but that is bubbling up in our own consciousness. We think we have to buy this and eat that and do this. What is really the truth for us? How can we actually manifest a life of kindness and caring for others? I think that is the key. So I'm just going to close with a short piece of music. As you can tell, probably, the books on the table, we have books that are focused mainly on developing intuition and also on compassion for other living beings, especially for animals. Madeline's beautiful paintings. We feel really strongly that part of the spiritual path is to allow all of life to celebrate and to get over and question really the narrative of human superiority over other expressions of life, and to have respect for other expressions of life. And so I'd like to just play a short piece of music that Madeline and I call the mouse piece. And this was inspired by a little mouse. We used to live in a house in Northern California, but when we moved in, it was overrun by mice. Actually, a lot of mice were living there. And so I developed this technique of catching them and putting them in a little jar that had holes, in the cat top. And then I would take them and let them go across on the other side of a little stream and hope that they wouldn't jump over and run back into the house again. And one day I had this little mouse, and I was ready to take her down across the stream. But I thought, well, maybe I'll play a little music for her. So we had a grand piano in the living room, and I put her in this jar on the grand piano, and I just started playing. And lo and behold, this beautiful melody emerged. I wrote it down. I'd like to share it with you now. And just to remember that all expressions of life have their own beauty. And when we look deeply into, how many of you have had a companion animal, like a dog or a cat or something? Right. So you know that there's someone in there, and that their interests are as important to them as our interests are to us. And when we honor them and when we respect them, we really are respecting ourselves. And that if we treat other living beings as pests to get rid of, pretty soon we're building nuclear weapons to get rid of people who have become pests, and we want to get rid of them. So the whole idea is to learn to have respect, even as it says in the Bible, for the least of these, even for a mouse. How can we have respect? Because like Walt Whitman said in one of his poems, he said, "And even a mouse is enough to stagger sextillions of infidels." Isn't that great? A mouse is enough to stagger sextillions of infidels. If we think that this world is just this absurdity that there was a big bang, like this miraculous bang, and then after that everything is random, this is such a total misunderstanding of life here. And I think we're all wounded by this, but we are waking up. So this is the mouse piece. May we remember that we can honor and respect all forms of life, and we can awaken from the official narrative in our society of domination and exploitation of other beings, and be an expression of kindness and compassion for all life. Enjoy.